Welcome to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others.
Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Podcast Studios in Rochester, New York. Mouth off at RockVox. RockVox.com. Having enjoyed a 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, executive and recovery coach, Keith Greer.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this episode of The Helping Conversation. Appreciate you making the time to sit in. We have an interesting conversation today with our guest, and I wanted to set a little context before I introduce him to all of you and we dive into the conversation. The Pew Research Center defines millennials as the people who were born between 1981 and 1996, and Gallup, which uses roughly the same time window, presently estimates that there are approximately 73 million millennials in the United States alone. Millennials already are the largest segment in the workplace. By 2025, they are estimating that 75% of the global workforce is expected to be made up of folks who fit this category of millennials. Millennials are our first generation digital natives who feel at home on the internet, using all the technology, all of our gadgets that I am not a native of as a baby boomer. And we know some things about this group of folk that can lead us in how we think about them in the workplace, can lead us in interacting with them in the workplace. And again, my guest today is an expert in this area. So a couple of key pieces from I found this 2021 survey that was done around what millennials look like in the workplace. Only 48% of respondents in this specific survey believe that corporations behave ethically. 47% think business leaders are committed to helping improve society, just 47%. It's not the biggest number. A majority of millennials across the world agree with the statement that businesses, quote, have no ambition beyond wanting to make money. 69% of employees who believe their senior management teams are diverse see their working environment as motivating and stimulating, so they're looking for that diversity. And this I thought was really interesting. 43% of millennials envision leaving their jobs within 2 years, while only 28% seek to stay beyond 5 years. And I think, boy, for me as a part of that baby boomer generation where we were taught your goal is to get a job and stay there for 30 years, that's a fascinating dynamic. And lastly, this is a statement from a CEO by the name of Michael Bush, and this comes from an article called The Best Workplaces for Millennials. Quote, they set the bar for other organizations seeking to retain and develop the next generation of leaders and prove that giving millennials jobs with purpose and meaning drives them to give their best at work, benefiting the company as a whole. So let me introduce to you our guest today. And we're going to dive into this a little bit more because this is who he works with. Geoff Seow is the founder of MindAxis Life Coaching, where he helps unfulfilled millennials create an inspired vision for their future through overcoming self-doubt with his MindAxis Method. Geoff is also an accomplished academic with a background in human biological science, neuroscience, and biotechnology. His mission is to guide his clients to reach their highest potential through which they can create a life of purpose and fulfillment. So please join me in welcoming into the Helping Conversation, Geoff Seow. Good morning, Geoff.
Good morning, Keith. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, so glad you can join us. And this is a fascinating conversation. I find myself in my work in this conversation quite a bit with leaders who sometimes find themselves scratching their head when they are of my generation and needing to lead folks maybe of this generation. There's just some differences. So we'll definitely dive in. But in addition to the introduction I just gave, fill us in a little bit on who you are and what your journey has been like in getting to do the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, so for me, my journey into life coaching started a few years ago. It started about 2 years ago when I got sober. So for me, I had followed that pathway you mentioned before. I got into a job, went through the academic pathway. I had always struggled with sobriety during this whole period in time, but I got completely sober 2 years ago. And that was the beginning of a lot of shifts in my life. I began to get really clear on who I was, the kind of person that I am on the inside and the things that I'm passionate about. And I directed that towards a focus. And for me, life coaching was something that popped up. So I started coaching about a year ago, and I've been loving it ever since. It's been awesome. It was the birth of MindAxis life coaching. It's very different, but not really in a sense from what I used to do, because I used to work in academia. We used to work in clinical research. My background is in neuroscience, as you mentioned earlier. So for me, understanding the mind and psychology, I love it anyways. So combines very well because I love talking. I love being extroverted. So it's almost like the perfect thing,
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, congratulations on your recovery, because that is a huge accomplishment in and of itself in today's world. To be willing to take that on, and to thank you for making yourself vulnerable and being upfront about that. And as you're talking about the gifts that it brings into our lives when we find ourselves in recovery as we define it. So. And it really sounds like that has framed a lot of how you come at your work. So let me jump into the next question then, because it's somewhat related to that. And it sounds like a piece of this for you, obviously, is finding recovery. But what else? What else might have been some pieces of who you are, going back even to being a kid, that were maybe would be pieces of evidence that you were most likely going to find yourself in the helping world?
Well, for me, I always wanted to be a doctor at a young age, right? So for me, the whole concept of being able to fix people up was something that really excited me. I'd always had, I don't know, it's just a strange candor that people used to always come to me for advice in every workplace or everything like that. And I've been called an old soul many times in my life, just from random people. They're like, wow, you sound like an old soul. I'm like, thank you. But I guess it's always kind of been there, like it started off in youthful exuberance, where you kind of look at it as I need to change people, right? Because I want to help them reach the version of who they could be. That's like when you're young and you think that it's your responsibility to do that.
Right.
But the older I get and who I am now, it's like I don't actively try to change people, but that's why I work in what I do, because people come to me when they're looking for change.
Yes.
I'm not trying to change them. And so that's where the dynamic comes in perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that description when I hear people use it, of that people have always seen me as an old soul, because what I think of, the connection I make with that term, is wisdom. That some people walk around at a much earlier age than others, seemingly in touch with a level of internal wisdom that maybe a lot of other people either don't, or it's going to take a little bit longer. And that, boy, is that needed in the world. So needed in the world.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And so I'm curious about something else you said, because this is such a significant shift in the world of helping for us to do the work we do, and to do it well, and to do it joyfully, and hopefully to do it for a really long time. And that's making that shift from, I want to fix people, which comes from a really good place, comes from a place of compassion and caring about the world. But we understand in the professional helping world, we have to get to this place of understanding I can't fix anybody. I engage them in a conversation where they make some decisions in their life, how they move forward. What was that transition like for you to move from I want to fix to I can't fix anybody, but I can be an expert at how to do this conversation with people?
It was really just awareness in terms of like as I grew older. When I was to work in different workplaces, so in my life, I've worked in well over 20 different workplaces. I've always been the kind of guy to hop around and do different things. I love it. I've had like 3 or 4 jobs at a time, always just doing different things. But the thing I learned is that when you give people advice on what you think they should do, it never ends well, right? Because it's unwarranted. And in so many instances, I've given advice or like shared this insight or this past event, and it's just never turned out in a way that was favorable for me or that person, because it came out of a place where I was giving them advice based on my own understanding of the world, but not digging to find out their understanding of the world.
Yeah.
So as time went on and I began to become more aware of myself and my actions and how people interact with me, I began to realize that, okay, like there has to be a better way about this.
Yeah.
And that's where I stumbled into the world of coaching, because there is a better way for it.
Right. Right. And I think that I always want to highlight that point because I'm sure your experience has been similar to mine, that many people out there don't understand what coaching is, and that often they attach to it a belief that, oh, I'm going to go see this person who's going to tell me what to do. Right? Like somehow we're the be all and end all fountain of wisdom. And to help people understand, no, that's not the conversation we do, right? That I don't walk into the room believing I know what's best for you. And I love what you said, that it never ends well. When we tell people what to do, it's a very different conversation to be in. So talk a little bit more specifically about the work that you do, and you talk about this MindAxis Method. Maybe a little bit more into that of what that is and how you use that in your work with your clients.
So the MindAxis Method is 2 coaching programs that I've created that have similar outcomes but have different durational periods. So the duration is based on the amount of accountability and support a person needs, but the end goal is there are multiple stages to this process. The first stage of the process is helping my clients get very clear on what it is they want to do, because in my observation and in my own experience is that without a sensation of meaning in our lives, we find ourselves lost.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of us search for new jobs or new careers, because we're looking for meaning. But meaning comes from some form of challenge, comes from some form of hardship, but something that's worthwhile fighting for. So the first step is to understand what is worthwhile for you and what's it going to make it possible for you to work on it in the long term. Now, the next step is understanding what obstacles hold you back. Are there people around you? Is it your mind? Is it fears? What's going on that's really stopping you from achieving this thing that you already know you want? Why don't you just want to do it? And that takes time. And then as we go through that process, we refine it towards a spearhead, which is how do we turn this into a strategy? So I have created a full goal setting strategy program, not just your average SMART goals. Like this is something that I use myself.
Yeah.
I know everyone says SMART goals, but this is like something I've created for myself, a method that I teach my clients on how to stay accountable, disciplined, and also focus on their goals, short-term and long-term. So you can see the process is all about unearthing who you are, discovering what holds you back, and then literally turning that into something that helps you go away from coaching where you can sustain yourself.
Right.
Because that's what I want. I want my clients to be able to sustain themselves in life.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sometimes I think about that, maybe one of the greatest gifts that we can give in our work is that we help the folks we work with walk away a little bit more insightful and a little bit more skillful at coaching themselves. Right? That they're able to take what we're pieces of our conversation, and now they can do it without us, which is a great thing.
Exactly. And coaching is, it's all about teach a man how to fish, not give a man a fish to eat.
Right.
Because you don't want your clients to be dependent upon you, right? That's what I learned early on, is you don't want them to be dependent. You want them to be able to take these sessions and be able to use it for themselves to create the life they want. Then they can help other people. They can help other people, right? Or whatever they want to do with their lives, they're independent to do it.
Yeah.
But you don't want someone just dependent on you to provide them support. Right. That's the way I see coaching. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. And all of that, I think that piece is a part of that larger narrative you mentioned a few minutes ago, that when we walk into the room, we're not telling people what to do. We don't believe we know what's best for them. They know what's best for them. I always say they know what's best for them, even in moments when they're saying to you, Coach, I don't know what's best for me. They do. We're just going to do some of that really patient work around listening, asking good questions, helping to expand awareness. So I'm with you 100%. You mentioned a couple of concepts I want to come back to. So you use the word meaning, finding meaning in people's lives. So I shared a few points around how we're starting to maybe think about who the millennial folks are. And I'm wondering if, first of all, you would agree or disagree with some of the things I shared, and how does that show up in your work around helping the folks you're coaching with start to dig into what would be most meaningful to me?
the statistics you shared at the beginning absolutely made sense, because millennials have been through such a high period of change, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, I remember like there was no internet. There was no like TVs as there are now. There were no laptops. If you wanted to connect to the internet, I think came out when I was around about 4, and we had to use the phone line, right? So that's just a bit of context to today, where I can just turn my phone on and search anything in the world.
Right.
Now, you think about a generation that has to go from not having any of that to having to adapt to having all of that, and at the same time maintain society.
Yeah.
That's a lot of burden. So therefore you kind of lose your sense of self along the way, because you can still see the old life, the old world that we lived in. But you can also see the new one that we're going into.
Right.
And for a lot of people, especially people on the different spectrum of being a millennial, like towards the 80s, can really struggle with that. Right. Even for myself, towards the far end of the millennial spectrum in the 90s, I struggle with that too. I remember a life without this form of modern convenience. So in terms of where that comes today, in terms of finding meaning, it's easy to lose your sense of meaning when all of the world that we've been, kind of seeing growing up is disappearing.
Yeah.
And we're told, these jobs, these careers, stay in them, but it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
For the boomers, as you mentioned before, in that generation, having a job was very sustainable. But these days it's not.
Yeah.
Because of automation, because of the digital age. You just have cheaper processes, because the whole point of a job is to be able to expend labor and energy. But now we want to reduce costs, because the whole point of a business is to reduce costs. Millennials are the byproduct of that change. And therefore there's a lot of struggle to find meaning. It's like, okay, like before you could have fixed meaning to your job. Now it's like, what do you fix meaning to? What's difficult? Food is convenience delivered to your house. Television, there's Netflix. There's so much convenience that it drags away the meaning from life, because the things that we used to strive towards are now provided to us free of cost. And that is a problem in itself.
Right.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. I'm also, as you were talking, I'm also sitting here thinking a couple of things, again, as a member of the boomer generation, that not only was the message, Keith, get a job and do it for 30 years, don't move around, don't do all of that. But I think your point is, I also had the ability to find jobs that paid pretty decently, provided really good benefits, which we know, that piece is going away. In many cases, I was always confident the business isn't going to go out of business. I'm not going to get sold by a private equity firm, right? And all of a sudden downsized. And the generation you're talking about here, they've experienced just the opposite. That there is a vulnerability in the workplace now, that this workplace could go away. As the statistics highlighted that I read, I don't have a great deal of faith that the people above me put me before they put, the bottom line of our company. And so it's just such a different landscape in the working world.
And it was always a natural progression, because the good times that occurred after World War II would have to come to an end at some point.
Right.
And the boomers were very lucky, and the boomers and the Zennials were very lucky to have that prosperity that came from a post-war era. But as you move into the future, it's always going to change, because it's cyclical, right? So everything in life is cyclical. If you look at history, you have ups and you have downs. And when you have too many ups, it creates a problem where we become kind of soft as a society, and it's very difficult to maintain hardship.
Right.
But hardship and discipline is what breeds meaning and striving. I'm not saying that's the only thing that does it, but when you look at the workplace, there's a lot of opportunities there that aren't present as they were.
Right.
That security isn't there anymore, because everything has an underlying avenue for profit.
Right.
That's where it's geared towards. And millennials are unfortunately undercut in that process.
Yeah. Yeah. So in addition to the forces at play here that, as you're highlighting, are very different in the workplace than a few generations ago, are there other pieces that are going into that for the millennial folk, of where they are choosing to find their sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment?
There are many avenues to find it, but it's very difficult for millennials to find it. Many of the people that I've talked to really struggle, because it all comes down to apathy. Like, I had a client recently who, on the surface, had the perfect life. He was earning well over 6 figures, had a very comfortable home, had, everything you could ever want for. Like if you were to offer that to anyone, they'd be, you'd think it'd be happy on the surface, but he was utterly miserable. He was utterly miserable about his situation. And when we really talked it through, it was because he had nothing to aspire towards. He was earning a top grade in his company. He made more than enough money to survive. He had no children, no partner.
Right.
It was just him. There was nothing more. So it was just a cycle of go to work, go home, and have a huge lavish lifestyle, but there was no meaning to it.
Yeah.
And a search for meaning goes deep, Keith.
Yeah.
A search for meaning, you can't find it from a TV show. You can't find it from a book. You have to really look within and say, like, okay, what is it that's worth striving for? What is it really? Yeah. What is it that I could spend my whole life doing? Not necessarily a what, but who will I be at the end of this process?
Right.
That's what I want to angle towards.
Right. Right. Yeah. Sometimes I ask folks I work with, what they would, what hope people say about them at their funeral, right? Or go home and write your own eulogy. And at the end of life, whatever that is, what is it that you want to leave behind? What do you want people saying about you and feeling about you and experiencing from you? And, most of the time it isn't, I want people to say, I didn't work enough. That's not what we're looking for. But we're so driven. I think we're, as a society, we're so driven by this significant piece of who we are, our job, and we all get it, right? Because it's a source of income. We have bills to pay. That's part of life. But I think the story you just told is highly illustrative. That boy, you can have what looks really good on the surface and have a sense of emptiness inside.
Absolutely. And are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy?
Yes. Yeah. But go ahead, please. Share a little bit more about it.
Sure thing. So Abraham Maslow was a genius, and he created a hierarchy basically on where your needs in life are met. So you have basic needs such as survivalism, such as, food, intellectual needs, emotional needs, etc. Now, when you start looking for meaning, it's when the rest of your needs are met. So in the case I mentioned to you earlier, when you have all of the money and the security, the safety, and you have your cognitive needs and your social needs met, well, what else is there left, right? Because as you go up the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy, there is one consistent factor, is that each level requires a certain level of striving. When there's survival, you're striving to survive. When there's emotional needs, you're striving to find, social company. When there's cognitive needs, you're striving for knowledge. Every single level of the hierarchy, you search for something new in your life to gain additional attributes to yourself. But the higher up you go, unfulfillment begins when you have all of that. You have the knowledge, you have the money, you have the security, you have the safety. What else is there? Right. Because life is not just about things. Life is about experiences. And that's what we look for when we're at the top. So not everyone is unfulfilled to a degree. A lot of people can be miserable about their situation because they're cognizant that they could be doing something better. But unfulfillment in itself is definitely linked towards self-actualization at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, where you begin to search for more as to why you're here.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you this. So I'm curious. So are you saying that if a human being were walking around and some of those really basic needs were not met yet in their life, that asking that person to think about this greater, deeper, nuanced conversation about meaning, that would be it would be more difficult for them to go there, because at the end of the day, they're still just trying to get their most basic needs met.
Absolutely. If you've got a starving stomach and you're thirsty and your kids aren't being fed and they're not being clothed, the last thing from your mind is what your life has meaning to. The first thing in your mind is, how do I survive? Then it comes to, how do I thrive? Right.
But yet the illustration you gave a few minutes ago is, I could be that person that has all of those needs met multiple times over and still feel pretty empty inside.
But it makes sense when you think about it, because he has the physical attributes met, he has the cognitive and the emotional, but someone at the opposite end of the spectrum doesn't have any of that. So they're going to be seeking to fulfill their cup first. Because before you embark on a mission of who you are, there's a lot that you've got to have. You've got to have resources, you've got to have knowledge, you've got to have a social group, you've got to have all these things, right? They normally come gradually in life as we live. But for certain people, it's very difficult depending on their situation. And they've got to sort that first.
Right. So I want to come back and ask you about another concept you threw out, because I always find this to be such a fascinating conversation with people. And that's the concept of accountability. Because we know in the research around change that accountability is a really good thing. You know, they always say, boy, if you're trying to lose weight, go public, let people know. I use the word hire some accountability partners. And yet I also know that most of the time I find with my clients that as soon as we get into the conversation about accountability, I always laugh because I have this picture that the first two people that pop into their head when we talk about accountability are their parents, right? Who held them accountable in ways that they probably didn't like, or they at least chafed against. And this is different. So when you have this conversation with your clients about accountability, what is that conversation, and what does accountability potentially look like in their lives?
It all comes down to, why do you want to do it? Why do you want to do it? Let's say, you want to lose 5 kilos. Why do you want to lose 5 kilos? If your reason to lose 5 kilos is so you can fit into that nice suit, is that a powerful enough reason to motivate you?
Right.
Or is that a reason to lose 5 kilos so you can be more healthy and fit in the long term? That's a more powerful motivator, because you've got to understand that, accountability, there's people that can hold you accountable, like, where you were saying before, having someone where you talk in public and you say, I'm going to do this. That can also lead to a lot of shame later down the road if you don't achieve your goal.
True.
I did that to myself in the past, and I said I was going to do this, because I wanted to be accountable, and then never went through with it. But the thing that keeps me accountable as a person, and how I explain it to my clients, is there's 2 things, okay? The first is a mental attribute. It's understanding why you're doing it. And the second is actually having a system. So a system that allows you to be accountable to yourself, because while other people can hold you accountable, other people have their lives too. So holding yourself accountable is the most powerful thing of all, because if you can hold yourself accountable, you can do anything in the world, like literally anything. There is no ceiling for you, because if you have the discipline, if you understand your daily standards, and you have a set regimen of how you see your life, and you build that for yourself, and it's for you because you actually respect yourself, no one can break that. That's for you.
Right.
So I help my clients get really clear on that foundation. It's building up the discipline, the accountability. Why do you want to do it? If you don't want to do it, maybe think about doing it later. But you've got to have a why.
Okay, so a couple of things there. So what you just said, so part of the work that you do is somewhat assessing readiness for change, because you just said if you're not ready to hold yourself accountable, maybe do it at another time, which I think is such a significant piece in our work, because there's such a narrative out there that I should be ready to change today, and if I don't do it, and you said it right, if I don't do it, that says something horrible about me. There's shame, there's guilt, there's embarrassment, self-recrimination, versus, are we ready? Right? Are we ready to change? And there's a whole, some people are familiar with the stages of change model that is, to me, is brilliant in asking people to be ready to change. Are they ready to change? But I love this. So your work with your folks is not about them developing necessarily external sources of accountability. This is internally, where do you need to be in your thinking, in your feeling, in your readiness to march forward with a pretty good chance that this thing you want to do is going to happen.
Absolutely, Keith. Because earlier when I mentioned that I want my clients to go away and literally live their best life and be accountable to themselves and help other people, it has to happen from the inside out. If you look for things on the external to fix what's on the inside, that's a recipe for disaster. That's called consumerism.
Okay.
On the opposite end of that is understanding who you are on the inside and building from the inside out. It's like, what's my reason why? What's my willpower? Where does my determination come from? Where does my drive come from?
Right.
How do I handle difficult situations and hardship? It's literally giving someone the tools to make the life they want for themselves. That, to me, is my coaching style.
That's awesome. So I have to ask, because I'm really curious about this. Because and this wouldn't be a surprise to people in our work with human beings. People come in all different shapes and sizes in terms of their skill at being disciplined. And so when you're working with someone, and maybe from the start of the conversation, they're presenting with some history of not being the most disciplined person when it comes to creating their goals, sticking to them, following through on them. Where does that conversation go with them? What are you looking to accomplish with that person, or hoping they will accomplish, that will up their game in terms of self-discipline?
So depending on the person that comes to me, if someone is really hoping for someone to just, listen to them and bounce ideas, that's probably not a good fit. That's why I always offer a free call that goes for about 45 minutes, because I need to understand if I can actually help you. If I can't help you, then I don't want to waste your time or your resources. But if I can help you, then what we'll do is we'll understand where this lack of discipline comes from. And from experience, what I've noticed is that a lot of the time, this lack of discipline comes down to fears. It's whenever there's an attempt to implement some kind of discipline, there's a fear that it might end in failure, or there's a fear that it might make them actually successful and they don't know how to deal with that, or there's a fear of judgment from the people around them who also don't have that level of discipline they're trying to build. These are the three main that I've actually kind of noticed. But discipline in itself requires a very strong reason why. It always comes back to that. It's like, why do you actually want a strong level of discipline? What do you want to achieve? Is it powerful enough? Because if there's one thing that I know, it's that unless someone is ready to change, they will never change. They have to be ready internally. That balance has to be shifted. Yeah.
No question. I want to, again, just highlight something you said, because for our listeners, if you ever find yourself thinking about hiring a coach, Geoff just said something that he offers all of his clients, that if the coach you talk to doesn't offer this to you, I lovingly and respectfully will suggest hang up the phone. And that is a willingness to do this first conversation. Some people call it a chemistry session. You might hear that concept thrown about, but this is an obligation we all have as coaches to make sure that we are working with people who are ready to do the conversation that we do. And if not, that's not, good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just then we're not the people to work with. And that's such an important offering that coaches should be putting out there. And I would imagine, Geoff, you, like I, have had those conversations where at the end both parties agree this isn't a match at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah,
maybe in future it might be, but as a coach, you got to be ready to only help those you can help, because otherwise you're wasting both parties' time, and I don't respect that. You got to respect the individual and yourself too.
Yeah, right. And that. For me, I know that's a very important. So there is that piece of, I don't want to invite you into a conversation that you're not looking for. But there's definitely the part for me that part of my work is I don't want to do any work that I'm not really having fun with, that isn't joyful for me. And I've been in those conversations where I hear it in my head, this isn't fun. And it's usually been that I have not listened deeply enough, and I have somebody in front of me who's looking to spend the hour just chatting and not really move forward. So that first conversation is so important to make sure I have someone in front of me who fully understands what I do, how I do it, and has agreed this is the conversation they're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And then you build synchronicity, and that's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, no question. Then it's just, it's the best. It is just the best. It's like the best dance in the world. Yeah. Yeah. So you're describing conversations with folks. As soon as we're talking about conversations that have anything to do with meaning, people trying to find meaning in their life, fulfillment. And we're talking about some of the most intimate, potentially vulnerable making conversations that two human beings can have. And so in our work, there is this piece about walking into the room with the other person and being really, really, really aware and on top of how we create and hold the safest, most trusting, inclusive space. And so I'm always curious with my guests in that area, what are some things you do, concepts that guide that work to really make sure right from the get-go that trust and safety and inclusiveness is firmly planted in the room?
Well, the thing about trust is that you can't really force it. You can't make someone trust you. So I personally don't do anything to make someone trust me,
right.
But I make sure that I am welcoming. I make sure that I actively listen. That's a big part of what I do is I actively listen. It's for the listeners, there's two different kinds of listening. There's passive and active listening. Passive listening is where you seek to respond based on your thoughts. Active listening is where you seek to understand and respond based on how someone else might be coming at you. So you're looking to understand and then respond based on that. So to me, that's all I do really. I just actively listen. I hopefully make my client feel comfortable, but I don't enforce trust or anything like that. I just listen to learn.
Yeah. Look, that's it, right? Like, this isn't about as soon as you even talk about forcing trust, you'll end up with the opposite. But it's that piece about active listening, and I love what you just said. I want to make sure I heard that really clearly because I think this is so important. And can you again just differentiate between the two types of listening?
Sure. So there's two types. There's passive and active listening.
Right.
Passive listening is where you seek to respond based on what someone else says to you. You take that and respond based on your own knowledge of the world.
Right.
Active listening is where you listen and you seek to understand their point of view and you reflect to them what you've understood from them.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right. And that we know that in the world of creating trust and safety, that kind of listening speaks to the part in people's brain that says, "Oh, I can trust this person," right? That they're bringing curiosity into the room. They're not forcing their meaning, right, from their life onto me. That they're truly interested. Sometimes I think, Geoff, about the difference in my world. I think about the difference between listening to understand and listening to connect. And listening to understand might be a little bit more into what you have referred to as passive listening. I'm just taking in what you say and I'm wrapping my meaning around it, versus listening to connect, which is truly listening deeply to you, bringing a great deal of curiosity and trying to understand where you're coming from. And as you said, feed that back. I would argue that's one of our superpowers as coaches.
It really is. It defines what coaching is to a degree. It's being able to recognize where someone is at.
Yeah. And,
also having the foresight. Coaching is a lot about foresight too. It's to recognize where that person is at and where they could go based on what they want. And being a coach is a lot more complex than a lot of people might understand. It's not just about listening. And you mentioned at the start, not many people have a grasp on it, and it's very true. Coaching often gets confused with counseling or therapy, yes. and it's not, because coaching is about forward-facing, right? It's like the same as when you want to play professional sport, you hire a coach. This is the same for your life or your mindset, et cetera, et cetera. But therapy or counseling is about looking at your past and helping you heal your trauma.
Right.
Coaching does a little bit about that, a little bit.
Right.
But it's mostly about helping you achieve the future you want.
Yeah, yeah. I find more times than not in my work, if I'm in the past, and I agree with you, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time there. If I'm in the past with clients, usually it's looking for strength and capacity. Moments in their life where they have exhibited that maybe they didn't think they did or had forgotten about it, and then bringing that as quickly as possible into the present moving forward. Otherwise, not a whole lot of time there. Yeah,
the past is a dangerous place.
Yeah. Everyone has one. I mean, we get that everyone has one. And again, please hear, I'm sure Geoff agrees with this. We're not saying a coaching conversation is better than a therapeutic conversation. They're just different. And one of the differences is, I call it the temporal quality, where in time and space the conversation happens. And it's having done that conversation, the therapy conversation, for many, many years. It's one of the things I love about the coaching conversation. It's where are you today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? And let's get moving.
It's very exciting and very exuberant. And a lot of people start off with therapy or counseling and then go to coaching once they've finished, because they've resolved their trauma and they're ready to look towards a brighter future.
Right.
And they go hand in hand. None is better than the other.
Right.
That wasn't what I was saying. I just want to clarify that. They have different purposes.
Yes. Yeah. But I would agree. I find I am often in that chemistry conversation with folks when they call. Part of that conversation is a bit of let's differentiate between counseling and coaching, because I think sometimes people do think it's all one and the same, and it's not. It's just, again, not better or worse, just a different conversation. So one of the other things, it sounds like you do this wonderfully with your clients. Another gift that I believe that coaches bring is that we are very strength based. We are looking for strength, capacity, the gifts that people bring into the world that they can utilize in moving their life forward. So I always ask my guests to model that, to model being strength-based. And so to brag a little bit about yourself. What are some of the strengths, uniquenesses, gifts that you bring to the world, to your work?
To me, it would be my willpower. To me, it would be my clarity. And you're talking about in terms of my coaching or my personal attributes?
Yes to both.
Okay. So in terms of a person, willpower, clarity, confidence, determination, drive, discipline. I keep myself very focused and very ready, and I train daily to make myself like this. It is not an overnight process. See, when I mentioned earlier that I was a drug addict, I was a mess 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't go to the gym even once a week. Right. So to get myself out of being in that state, I recognized that I had to build myself a backbone, right? Because I couldn't be a slob my whole life. So what I did when I came out of this process is I quit drugs first, and I quit drinking and smoking cigarettes as well along this journey. I quit partying, everything, changed my entire life. But the way to do this was I put myself through extreme rigorous hardship. So I was working full time. I went to the gym and trained for 2 hours every day, and I was studying. I stopped seeing a lot of friends, and I spent all of my time just building up my body, training my mind and training my spirit, meditating, understanding myself, being alone. When I quit my full-time job last year, I literally moved to Melbourne on a spur. I just left, quit my job, lived in the middle of a lockdown. All I did was train and work 16 hours a day. I've built myself up. And the only reason I don't falter is because of my willpower.
Yeah.
I have a very strong reason of why I do things. And I also have the discipline to not let myself fall back.
Right.
So in terms of myself, this is how I build myself up. My foundations, it's not about who I think I want to be in 10 years or 5 years. It's about my foundations will allow me to achieve all of that. I know that because I've built that over time. I've built that consistently, and I never stop every day.
Right.
Even if I'm dead tired, 2 hours sleep, you'll find me at the gym. It doesn't matter. 1 a.m. at night, you'll find me at the gym. You'll find me reading. You'll find me training. It doesn't stop, because that's how you maintain your foundation. You got to love it. You got to love that process.
Yeah. I'm just writing that down. I love that. Right. So the importance of foundation. I'm curious, as you were saying that, I'm thinking, this thing we do in the workplace where we ask people, once a year when you sit down and you do your annual review or whatever it's called, and we ask, set 3-year goals, set 5-year goals, where do you see yourself going with the company? And I'm just thinking, we don't really ask people, what foundation are you building this on? And what are you doing day to day to make sure that that foundation is solid? We're so busy, where do you want to be? And then we scratch our heads and wonder why people don't get to where they want to be. And so it sounds like, for you, that first and everyday conversation is, am I doing what I need to do to keep my foundation solid?
It's an expectation. It's I wake up and I know what I have to do. Everything is planned. Everything is ready. I know what I want to do. Even if I'm dead tired, it does not matter.
Yeah.
You will find me doing what I have to do because I have the discipline to pull through. And this is what I teach to all of my clients and share, is that I don't obviously force it, but I shared how it's done. And it's done with daily excellence, daily habits.
Yeah.
Your habits underpin a lot of your life, actually. Depending on what you do in your spare time will determine what you do in your active time. And your habits really define everything you do, what you eat, where you train, how you do it, what time you wake up, what you do with your spare time. All of this combines towards personal excellence. And you've got to have the balance just right. And you've got to know why you're doing it, because creating that balance is very difficult, especially in today's modern society.
Right. Very
difficult. So you've got to have a good reason to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Somewhere on my computer at home, I have this, it's kind of like a poem. And the name of it is Who Am I? and it describes, I'm this thing that will move your life forward. I'm this thing that will hold you back. You have total control over me if you want. If you don't take total control over me, I'm going to take total control over you. And it goes on, over several paragraphs. And then at the end, it says, who am I? And the answer to it is habits, right? That it's your habits, right? That either work for you and will move you wherever you want to go, or will keep you sitting still.
That's really cool, Keith. So you've got that and you see that every day.
Yeah. I'll email it to you. I'll send it to you.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'll hand that out to people sometimes. And people come, oh, well, maybe it's your intuition and it's this, but it's those daily habits that we all engage in, right? And some work and some don't. And that seems to be a conversation people, again, we're just always looking down the road. Where do I need to be? What do I need to? Let's just start today. So I'm curious, because I'm always personally curious about this, because from our conversation that I spend a lot of time in my work in the world of substance use disorder treatment and recovery. So for you, 2 years ago, back to our conversation a few minutes ago about readiness to change. Man, it sounds like, and I know it wasn't this simple, it sounds like you woke up one day and said, shit, I'm moving my life forward. I know it wasn't that simple, but what was that like for you? What was that moment, with the why moment to radically move your life in a different direction?
So I had been a drug addict from the age of 17 until 24.
Yeah.
Right. And I screwed up so many times in my life. I never made it into medical school because of that.
Yeah.
I messed up a lot of times. I still made it through with 3 academic degrees, but I never got that one crowning piece, which was getting into medical school.
Yeah.
That's okay. But the thing is that so many times these habits let me down, and I hated it. It came to a point where I hated myself.
Yeah.
I hated myself so much. Like, just looking in the mirror would make me angry, And then I had a book that I bought 5 years ago. And this is like, even when I say this, it doesn't make sense how this played out. But I bought a book 5 years ago. I had it in my bookshelf and I never read this book. And then one day I decided, okay, maybe let's try reading on the way to work, just to, get the mind flowing, because I used to travel 2 hours back and forth every day to work at the hospital. So this book is called The 50th Law. It's by Robert Greene and 50 Cent. 50 Cent the rapper.
Yeah.
And you know the book?
I do not know the book, but I just know who 50 Cent is, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So The 50th Law is all about 50 Cent's rise, about how, he started off on the streets as a drug dealer, and then he got shot, I think, like 12 times. Maybe more. And then he came back to life and he turned himself into what he is today, a multi-million-dollar mogul. And I read the book and I learned about it, but it wasn't about his change to fame and fortune. It was about the fact that he dealt drugs, but he never did drugs. He never did drugs. He went to the club and carried around a bottle of alcohol that was filled with water. He never drank, he never smoked, he never did drugs, because he knew that clarity is number one.
Right. That
no matter what you do in life, you can never be successful in any area of your life if you don't have clarity. And to me, I never understood that. At that point in my life, since 17 years old, to me, it's like part of just life. It's like, oh, it's normal. In Australia, it is very normal to live like this.
Right.
I'm sure in America it is too. But it's very normal. So for the first time in my life, I realized, what am I doing with myself? Like, why am I deliberately sabotaging myself every day? Why am I moving the Geoff that I want to be further away than Geoff that I'm today? And it got me furious. I was really just worked up about it. I was like, why is it that I cannot do this simple thing and change my life?
Yeah.
So one day I radically did it. I finished reading the book and I said, today's the day. And I tried to quit drinking, smoking, and drugs all at once. It did not go very well.
Right.
So I cut off the drugs first, and it took me about 6 months. And then I cut off the smoking, and then I cut off the drinking. And I cut off the drinking before I went to Melbourne last year. So I've been sober for a year. And it was a very gradual process. Yeah. But that was my why, realizing that every single time that I, smoked a joint or popped a pill or took a sip of liquor or smoked a cigarette, right, I was only hurting myself.
Yeah.
There was no one else that was paying the price but me. And that hurts, man, when you realize that you're literally just shooting yourself in the foot every time you can't control your impulses.
Right.
There's nothing more disgraceful than that, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. There's those habits that are going to always hold you back. I also always want to highlight this because I think so many people, this is another piece that so many people don't understand or appreciate around the concept of recovery from addiction, that the type of recovery Geoff is describing. Now, some people sometimes would call it spontaneous recovery. Now, obviously, he did not describe something that happened spontaneously, like in 1 minute. But the concept of people coming into recovery somewhat on their own, not having gone to inpatient, not having gone to some kind of formal treatment, excuse me, that people would be surprised how many people find recovery that way. And it's part of what is starting to be highlighted as we become more knowledgeable about multiple pathways of recovery, that not everybody goes to treatment, not everybody needs to go to treatment. A good number of people find recovery according to the pathway that Geoff described, that they on their own say, enough, I don't want to be this way anymore, and I'm going to take some steps over a period of time to move my life forward. So again, man, Mazel tov, congratulations to you, and because that's not easy. It's not easy to change those habits.
Yeah, it was extremely difficult, but it's been entirely worth it.
Yeah, awesome.
I would never go back.
Yeah, sounds it. And it sounds like, back to the work you do, there was this process where you found your meaning and that you are able to share that. So I'm curious because, different people have different thoughts about this in the world of coaching, because we are, this might be something that we think of more in the world of doing like addiction counseling, and that is the use of self-disclosure. So in your work with your clients, do you disclose any of this to them? Do you use snippets of your story as somewhat illustrative for where people can potentially go?
Absolutely. If it's relevant, 100%. I have no reservations in speaking about myself, as you can probably tell.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of this coaching process, I was very shy. I could not speak about it at all. But now I realize that it's what makes me me, and it's what gives me an understanding of people that might be struggling with the same. So to hold back would kind of just be to ruin that experience for them, because I could be understanding what they're going through and guiding them through it. But if I were to hold it back, then there's no point of relatability.
Right.
And it comes back to that trust as well. If you've been through something that someone else has been through, that's trust immediately.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. And I think sometimes those of us in the coaching world, in the therapy world, that there's this fear that, I'm not supposed to share this piece of me and it's not about me. And I agree with that. I think you're saying, Geoff, this process isn't about us. It's about the people we work with. But this piece of, judiciously, thoughtfully using self-disclosure to engender hope, to engender connection, that those are some really powerful moments when done well. Obviously, people can overshare, and then people's boundaries aren't clear. But when done well, boy, what a gift you are giving to the other human being in the room.
And I love what you said about oversharing as well, because that's something that I learned early on in my coaching days. It's where I would just blurt it all out. I'd be like, this. And it would leave people kind of just shocked. It's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But coaching it also has to be intentional, right? As coaches, we have to be intentional about what we say and how we do it.
Right.
It's not just about, telling people I've done this so you can do it too, because if that was the case, then there wouldn't be coaches. So we have to be intentional in how we lead someone down a particular avenue that they want to follow.
Yeah.
But not in a way where we say, oh, you just got to do this. It's like, no, it's intentionally strategize.
Right. So what would you say at the end of the day in this work that you've been doing over the last few years, what would you say are some of the gifts to you of doing the work with your clients?
That's a great question, Keith, because I was thinking about this all of last week, because I had COVID last week, and I was really just reflecting on what was going on. And it made me realize that, through my coaching time, I've learned so much about people. And the greatest thing that I've learned is that humanity is all parts of the same puzzle. So many clients share the same struggles, the same dilemmas as other clients, and they share the same as you, and we all reflect each other. And it's just been so amazing to learn that and actually just be a part of it. That's why I really enjoy this, because the more you coach, the more you learn about yourself too.
Yeah.
Because we're never finished articles. We're always learning, we're always growing, we're always getting better.
Right.
That's the whole point of what gives me meaning in life, right? To grow as an individual. So to me, when I coach, it helps me understand more about humanity, more about people, and more about myself. And it's a full circle, and I love it, Keith.
Yeah. I'm with you. It is, I have a very good friend. He's my age. We've been friends and colleagues for many, 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 many years. And we were just having this conversation. We were playing some golf together, and we were talking about, as we were walking, about the gifts to us of having carved out this kind of career in the helping world. And in some ways, and we've talked about this numerous times over the years, the gifts to us as men, even more specifically, to have been in a field that asked us to become very early in our lives thoughtful about ourselves, self-aware, to dig into our intuition, to ramp up our ability to be compassionate and empathic, and that maybe even more so, given our specific gender, when you look around the world, that it has been, whatever our clients have walked away with, great, but the gifts to us have just been phenomenal.
I like what you said there about being a male and being a coach as well. It's that it kind of, there's like a stigma or definitely a stereotype that a lot of coaches are female, right? And the thing about being a male and being a coach is that you don't have to take on female attributes, but you just learn more on how to be a balanced male.
Yeah.
You learn to think through past male aggression or past male anger, and you start to think in certain ways where you balance your left and right hemisphere, and you can be creative and you can be logical, and you just, I would call it the full package.
Yeah.
It's understanding yourself. And not many males go through that process, because for males, they have a certain stereotype of what they can do.
Yeah.
There's certain jobs or certain things, and they don't get the opportunities. So I would 100% agree with you on that one. This is definitely fortitude.
Yeah. No, it's great. It is such a gift to us as the folks who do this. So yeah. Geoff Seow, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed spending some time with you.
Likewise, Keith. I'm grateful for you to have me. It's been amazing to be here.
Awesome. I will make sure, folks, as you're listening to this podcast, in the podcast notes will be a link to how you can contact Geoff and learn more about what he does and set up a conversation with him if that's something you want to do. I would urge you to consider that if there is anything that we talked about today that resonates for you, or maybe somebody that you know. And especially within that world of folks who are in that millennial group, who are looking for meaning, looking for fulfillment in a world today that's a bit challenging. I think for all of us to keep an eye on that and to really carve out that piece in our lives. So I thank you for sitting in with us and being a part of this episode of this podcast, and I invite you to join us again as we continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Everybody have a great day.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the helping conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.